Admittedly, after many years of admiring its familiar, deep red facade and gathering any information that could be accumulated from solely an exterior perspective during walks near the corner of Nicholson and North England Street in Colonial Williamsburg, the truth was, I knew little about this historic home, the enslaved people who were bound here, nor the man, the founding father of the United States, who once lived in it with his wife. My utter fascination with the past and the people and places that make up its stories led me to want to learn more about Peyton Randolph and his home. One of Williamsburg's oldest surviving buildings still standing, with the west portion of the home dating back to around 1715. This is the very place he inherited from his father, Sir John Randolph, after his mother, Susanna Randolph, passed away, as detailed in his father's will.
After her death, I give all my said houses and lots in Williamsburg, and my household servants and slaves, and other premises before given to my wife during her life, to my son Peyton Randolph, and to his heirs and assigns forever. I also give unto my said son my whole collection of books, with the cases in which they are kept, hoping he will betake himself to the study of the law.
Peyton, who lived in this house since age 4, was only a teenager when his father died, and would fully receive his inheritance by age 24. He would go on to fulfill his father's hopes, attending the College of William and Mary, and then becoming a member of the bar in 1743, after studying law at Middle Temple of Gray's Inn in London. His political career would mirror the likes of his father and grandfather before him. He was appointed the Crown's Attorney General of the colony of Virginia and was elected to the House of Burgesses the same year. Later, he would become the Speaker of the House of Burgesses. He chaired the Virginia Committee of Correspondence, was president of the first 3 Virginia Revolutionary Conventions, and during the outbreak of the War for Independence, he was nominated president of the First and Second Continental Congress, the body of delegates who coordinated resistance against the tyrannical acts of the Crown at the beginning of the American Revolution. Dying roughly a year prior to the signing of the Declaration of Independence, some say his role presiding over the First Continental Congress earned him the honor of being first to be called the father of our country, although before the nation's independence was achieved. Randolph lived out his lifetime in Colonial Williamsburg, living inside this house. The site is interpreted during the time period just before his death. Described by Thomas Jefferson, his first cousin once removed, a most excellent man, and none was ever more beloved and respected by his friends. Yet even though his legacy and reputation as a friend, barrister, politician, and revolutionary leader were all well merited, like many of the brilliant-minded founding fathers that helped forge the country's individual freedoms and liberties, his advocacy for these rights was not extended to the 27 enslaved individuals that were kept at his house. During a time when over 52% of Williamsburg's population was enslaved, Peyton Randolph was one of its largest private slaveholders. 3 generations of enslaved people carried out their lives in bondage to the Randolph family. In later years, after Lord Dunmore announced a proclamation enticing slaves with a possibility of freedom if they escaped their masters and fought for the British, 8 enslaved at the Randolph household would act on this ruling. Recently reinstating our annual passes to Colonial Williamsburg, it allotted us entry inside for a long-awaited tour and close-up look throughout the Peyton Randolph House, a place where 2 different worlds collided. A prominent, wealthy family that lavished in the many luxuries of gentry-class living, and the enslaved who were kept here and forced to serve the Randolph's personal needs and carry out the day-to-day duties and upkeep of the household. The archaeological and architectural evidence recorded at the house leaves room for mystery and wonder in regards to the exact usage of each room found inside the Randolph house. Many alterations and additions were carried out over time, thought to have been the result of Peyton's desire to elevate his image amongst Virginia's colonial society. The various shifting roles of rooms inside the house have been heavily investigated. The restoration of the house was factored on an array of historical findings, including thoroughly reviewing and understanding the home's complex footprint, room size, room finish, home traffic patterns based on varying scenarios, as well as the estate's recorded inventory logs. I was more than thrilled to finally have the opportunity to enter inside the original western portion of the home, which dates back to the early 1700s. I was also equally excited to view other parts of the residence, later added and enhanced by Peyton Randolph himself. The first building we entered was the restored servants' hall. This was the living quarters of the enslaved. A small gathering place where they could eat, rest, and carry out their daily lives amongst one another the best they could. Their personal lives taking place inside this small, meager room. Upstairs was additional areas where they slept and could spend time at when not laboring for the Randolphs. I was startled to learn that only 4 of the 27 enslaved here lived inside the main home. Lying next to the quarters was the area that functioned as the Randolphs' laundry. An exhausting task that required an astounding rotation of large pots and buckets to be filled with water daily, and then carried into the room and incorporated into the tedious task of laundering the Randolphs' garments. A laundress, as they were sometimes called, would boil water over an open fire and then utilize soap and excruciating energy to scrub clothing and other textiles clean before wringing out each item, drying, ironing, and folding. A vigorous process that must have reaped painful physical repercussions to those responsible for daily laundry duties. Inside the kitchen is where food preparation for the Randolphs took place. A massive hearth with what appeared as some sort of 18th century slow roasting rotisserie contraption known as a spitjack was used to slow roast poultry, beef, and pork. Dutch ovens, black kettle cauldrons, skillets, pots and pans were all used to cook various dishes for dinner presentations for family and guests, typically served around the middle of the day. Dinner's leftovers were often used for supper that evening and then breakfast the next morning. Passing through the 44-foot-long connector that links the kitchen to the west wing of the house, the thought of the enslaved house servants who walked this passageway on a daily basis came to mind. Each captive serving the interest of the Randolphs, seen merely as property, with each having an assigned value as recorded in their owner's will and testament. A grim reminder of their harsh reality, thinking of the life they were forced to live, constantly catering to another's needs while suppressing their own. finally entering inside the main house. The first room we came to was a portion of the original house that dates back to the early 18th century. This small room, referred to as a closet, is thought to have been the private, personal space of Miss Randolph, based on a peculiar inventory entry that listed miscellaneous items thought to have been kept in this area, followed by the input, sundry articles in Miss Randolph's closet. The closet would have been where Miss Randolph managed the daily affairs of the home, those enslaved, as well as her own personal care. Another original room in the Peyton Randolph home, the parlor, a popular place for the lady of the house to do various crafts like stitching a needlepoint or making a gown. It was also a place for entertainment purposes or for having tea with guests of the house. Inside this room, most of the paneling is original. The projecting cornice above the south wall's 2 windows provides an interesting clue. The same feature is also found on the adjacent wall, evidence this wall too previously had a window before the west and east wing of the house were later joined together. Also almost entirely original were the parlor's yellow pine floors, the very floors that Washington, Rochambeau, Lafayette, and other prestigious guests of the Randolphs probably walked over during visits, meetings, or overnights spent at the Peyton Randolph estate. I also discovered the west and east doors are in their original locations, and both were original to the house. Before climbing the narrow staircase to go up to the second floor, I took a quick peek inside the room where John Randolph's law books, willed to his son, were thought to have been kept. This room was probably the office space or library of Peyton Randolph himself. Climbing the back stairway brought me to the childhood corner bedchamber of a young Peyton Randolph. Another room from the original west wing of the house, the upstairs parlor functioned as a multi-purpose space. This room was yet another area closely cared for by the enslaved house servants living at the house. Their daily lives required them to meet the ever-abundant demands of the Randolph's social and personal lives. An enslaved person that tended to a room like this was sometimes referred to as a chambermaid. Their duties included keeping the parlor area clean and tidied, warming beds, ensuring the fireplace was well lit and tended to, staging the area for social gatherings, and preparing for the arrival of guests who would spend overnights here. Perhaps one of the many rooms where Lieutenant General Rochambeau, the commander-in-chief of the French Expeditionary Force, who played a significant role in the United States defeating the British Army at Yorktown, would have plotted his battle strategy from. The Peyton Randolph home was his headquarters during preparations for the Siege of Yorktown in 1781, with Washington headquartered a quick walk down Nicholson Street at the George Wythe House.
And for location perspective, directly in front of me, you can see George Wythe's house lying along the Palace Green, all the way at the end there. And then east of that, on Nicholson Street, is where you will find Peyton Randolph's house.
And much later, in 1824, an area General Lafayette may have passed through, en route to withdraw to a well-prepared sleeping chamber after a long day of festivities. Lodging at the Peyton Randolph home on a 2-day return visit to Williamsburg during his triumphant tour of the United States. Quickly tucking away from the guided tour, I wanted to get a closer look inside the oak bed chamber on the second floor of the home, the suspected bedroom of Elizabeth Harrison, Betty Randolph's niece. Probate inventory logs, letters, diaries, and other historical clues were used to match the furnishings of the room during those years. The oak door and trim in the west wall is original, and all of the oak paneling inside the room is original too, except for the north wall and the paneling surrounding the diagonal fireplace. Gazing out at the nearby courthouse, I was looking through the window of the upstairs center passage, part of the 2-story addition that is thought to have been constructed around 1753. Passing through, it brought me by a narrow space that appeared to be a general storage location for various necessities, housing embellished trunks and a corner cabinet that appeared to hold some glassware and other household items within it. Believed to be the bedchamber of the Randolphs, mysteriously, the room's inventory recorded there were 2 beds inside the room. Perhaps another bed was brought in upon Peyton's death in 1775 for a relative, to keep a saddened Miss Randolph company throughout sleepless nights of grieving. Curious about the original components of the bedchamber, I learned the 3 doors in the room and their trim were each made of walnut with their natural finish kept, all being original. Like in most rooms, all paneling in this room is completely original too, except for the areas surrounding the fireplace on the east wall. The pine floors and the majority of the windows and their walnut trim are also original, except for the west window located on the north wall. Descending from the upper floors brought us past the semicircular window found at the staircase's halfway point. A vantage point the Randolphs and the enslaved servants working from within the house would have gazed through. It would have provided a clear view of the estate's demanding backyard labor. The window seen here today has a new sash and trim, but the window frame is original. The staircase itself is a plausible replica of the original that was once frequently climbed and descended by the Randolph family, their guests, and the enslaved servants working within the home. Reaching the bottom of the staircase finally brought me to the first floor's grand central passageway, an entry point at the south side of the house facing Nicholson Street. Many notable people, including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Richard Henry Lee, Patrick Henry, and other founding fathers and distinguished guests, would have entered into the house here during visits. The final interior room at the Peyton Randolph House I would find myself in was the dining room. Because of its large size, exquisite finish, and the intricate items kept within this room, each based on the recorded inventory logs, this room was most likely a place for entertainment, but also partly used for dining, as the historical evidence suggests. The dining room was well serviced by the servants of the house and other enslaved people who waited on the Randolphs hand and foot, expected to react and respond swiftly to nonverbal cues given by the lady of the house, signaling for the demands of the occasion as they would arise. All three doors inside the dining room are original, and most of the windows retain their sash and the majority of their trim, except for the north wall's west window. As other parts of the home proved, the pine floors, pine paneling, as well as the baseboard, chair rail, and box cornice are all original at the time of restoration. Only areas that required patching and repair were modified. And then finally, I also discovered the dining room's fireplace is also original, although some degradation of the marble mantle and shelf were present before restoration, but later corrected. Departing from the home's rear exit, I wanted to explore the backyard of the house. In 1997, a reconstruction of the outbuildings began atop the brick outlines of what once stood here in the backyard area. Each building accurately preserved by studying the architectural information from other nearby 18th century outbuildings in their effort to interpret the findings at the Peyton Randolph House. I wanted to get a quick inside glimpse at each of them. The lumber house was a general storage building where many of the tools needed to upkeep the yard, stable, and gardens were kept. It also held items like tubs and barrels used to maintain chores for the household. Though the foundation footprint revealed little to indicate the exact usage of the outbuilding sitting beside the lumber house, it depicts what the dairy outbuilding on the premises might have looked like. A place where a dairymaid, an enslaved woman of the Randolphs, would perform intensive manual tasks like churning milk into butter, processing milk and cheese, and then keeping them here in storage. An area that had to be kept clean and spotless, with fresh and ready dairy items ready to be brought to the Randolphs at moment's notice. The earthen-floored 12-foot square smokehouse was the first outbuilding on the Peyton Randolph property to be reconstructed. Inside smokehouses in the 18th century was often a central brick firebox which slowly expelled smoke up towards the building's highly pitched, pyramid-shaped roof to slow smoke beef, venison, fish, and pork that were hung from the rafters. As I stood there, I imagined a pleasing smell and visualized a gentle stream of smoke billowing from the smokehouse as I gazed upon it. Nearby the smokehouse was a larger storehouse, similar to the smaller lumber house, another place for storing yard tools, crops, timber, household furniture, and other items that required storage space. With plenty of room inside, I was told the enslaved on the property would have probably slept here too, when considering the cramped space of the servants' living quarters. The large outbuilding next to the big storehouse is thought to have been the granary, a storehouse where threshed grain was stored in sacks and kept here to keep dry. After threshing grain from its husk, an enslaved person would cart the processed food between the house and Peyton Randolph's nearby plantation. The entry door was locked on the day of our visit, but I learned other crops like corn, potatoes, and vegetables would have probably been stored here too. Inventory logs show the small storehouse at the back of the yard housed kitchen and household items. The Randolphs had a chicken coop in the yard. Chicken and eggs were abundant, and often, during market days in Williamsburg, the excess eggs and oftentimes chickens were sold for money. Visiting during the off-season, the rows of the vegetable garden showed limited growth. In the 18th century, the garden was constantly maintained in order to keep a healthy rotation of seasonal vegetables on the plates of the Randolphs and their many guests of nobility and gentry that would often dine with him. Another exhausting task for the enslaved gardeners who would have to regularly maintain it. The well in the backyard was the only one that served the entire Randolph site. It is the same well that was probably used in the early 18th century. Peyton Randolph and family would have drank the waters from its cool, dark depth. In the 19th century, a windmill was built above it. The well was used as late as the early 1920s before being entirely filled in. An extensive look at so many of the rooms, spaces, and outbuildings of the Peyton Randolph House in Colonial Williamsburg took my understanding of this often forgotten founding father's homestead to a whole new level. Never again will I look upon it in the same manner during visits here. After exploring both the original and restored portions of the house, along with so many of its original features amongst each room, I left the Peyton Randolph House with a clearer picture of what life looked like inside the house, the occasions within each room, and increasing my understanding of the enslaved people who endured so much here while catering to the Randolphs' everyday personal and household needs. 27 human beings that had their humanity stifled during a period of time when so many of those who kept others held in bondage for their service fought to claim their own freedom and separation from the oppressive powers, unjust rule, and restraints imposed upon them. The Peyton Randolph House was truly a place where two distinctly different lives played out, yet both desiring the same outcome. One of Virginia's most well-respected and prominent figures resided in this home while carefully asserting his legal genius and superior political persuasion tactics to carefully assist in navigating the country toward its ultimate vision for independence, and the lives of those enslaved who lived and endlessly labored at the Peyton Randolph House, utilizing every ounce of their human capacity to withstand mistreatment and keep their humanity intact, while visualizing and hoping for a life of equal rights and freedom.